Good morning, afternoon, or evening, folks, and welcome to Cast of All Trades, the show where I talk about developing skills, exploring ideas, and following curiosity. I'm your host, Orion Siebert, and in this episode, I share my thoughts on college as a jack of all trades. Namely, what was my college experience like, what are some recommendations I would give to aspiring generalists looking at college, and how did I make the most of it? At the time of recording this, I just graduated with my Bachelor's of Science in Business Management from Utah Valley University, and I wanted to share my experience and what I learned before I forgot most of it. If you enjoy this style of episode where I share my experiences as a Renaissance man and lessons I've learned along the way, then be sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on more episodes like this one. I think that about covers it. So, without further ado, what did I learn from being a jack of all trades in university? Before we dive into my lessons and what I've learned, I think it's important to take a step back and remember what is the purpose of college/university. Ideally, it's to educate and prepare students for more advanced and ideally better paying careers, so that they'll have access to after going to college. Otherwise, what will be the point? You're spending thousands, sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to go to a campus, to learn from people, to hopefully get a job that you are paid less? No. You want to go to school so you can learn better skills, you can get a job you might want more, something that pays better, something that has better benefits. Ideally, college and university are there to prepare you for the world, to improve you in some way. Originally, universities were designed to create the universal man, hence why they're called universities, where there were no majors, everyone took every class, and the goal of these universities was becoming more knowledgeable across most, if not all, domains. Of course, we can't really do that so much these days, just because of how in-depth we've developed our sciences, our maths, our arts, to be able to really learn about all of these things at a super in-depth level. That's going to take years upon years upon years. So, today, college is much more designed to shove people down one path, encouraging people to hyper-specialize, because supposedly that's going to lead to greater success, when in reality, the level of financial and workplace success will vary, but on average, the generalist will actually outpace the specialist over a longer time frame, while the specialist will typically outpace the generalist over a shorter time frame. That said, in simpler terms, if you graduate from college with a hyper-specialized degree, you're more likely to get a better job right out of college, but in the long term, the generalist is likely to outperform the person who is a specialist right out of college and focuses on that one speciality. Of course, this is on average, and there are going to be outliers here, but that's not what I'm talking about. So that's roughly the purpose of what college and university were. They were to help students prepare for ideally getting better careers down the line. But what was my reason for going to college? Because for everyone, it's going to be different. Well, mostly because it was kind of expected. It was sort of a notion that was shoved down my throat ever since I was in elementary school, middle school, and throughout most of high school. My parents did a good job at letting me decide what I want to do, where I want to go, all that stuff. They did great giving me more freedom with that. But it was more the public school system and the school system I was a part of. They were very much pushing people down more of the college route. Yes, they did offer trade shows, they did offer other ideas. Hey, you might want to go take a look at this trade school, or you might want to go look at doing something else right out of high school. But for me, since I did really well in high school, it was very much pushed on me that, hey, you should go to college. You would do really well there. And they're right, I did do really well in college. But overall, in general, my reason for going to college was it felt like the natural next step. It was kind of the thing that was expected on me, that I sort of expected of myself to go and do, just because it seemed like the right thing at the time. Before I go even more into what I really learned from college, I think it would be good to share what my experience is kind of like. So I started off at UVU sort of on a whim in spring of 2020. I was originally going to go to Brigham Young University just down the road from Utah Valley University, but some things happened, some things changed, and I ended up switching to Utah Valley University because BYU is just not much of an option at that point. yeah, I started sort of on a whim, spring of 2020. So I landed in Utah January 1st, 2020, right before the COVID pandemic happened. I started off studying in biotechnology, and it was great from there. Started off in biotech. I generally just did that because genetics interested me at the time, and I thought, sure, this is kind of cool. Maybe I'll stick with this, maybe not. I ended up switching to mechanical engineering that first semester, which is kind of expected because just based on what I had been doing most of my life, I enjoyed building things, I enjoyed tinkering, I like all that stuff. So it kind of made sense. And I kind of knew going into it, yep, you're going to switch to mechanical engineering early on. So I did that. I studied mechanical engineering for a couple years, but eventually switched to business management in spring of 2022. So about 2 years later, switched to business management. Of course, right after I finished all of the difficult math classes in mechanical engineering. So, yay, good timing. But I switched to business management and I decided to graduate with that. So 2 years, about 2.5-ish years later, graduated spring of 2024. So I spent a total of about 4.5 years working on my bachelor's degree and picking up an associate's along the way. So that was roughly my experience in a very 90,000 bird's eye view level of what I did. But let's get down to more brass tacks and what lessons I actually learned in the process. So I'm going to go over a couple different things. I want to go over how I chose my classes, what were some of the benefits of being a jack of all trades in college, what were some of the drawbacks, what did I do well and what mistakes did I make, what majors might I recommend for generalists, and finally, would I recommend college at all? So starting off with how did I choose my classes? Classes are going to be the meat and potatoes of whatever you're doing at university. Obviously, you're going there to learn, so you're going to have to pick classes. And most people, as I was talking with them and figuring out, oh, what are they doing? What do they like? And I found that most people had a sort of laissez-faire attitude of, yeah, I'll just pick classes at the beginning of each semester. I didn't really do that. At the beginning of, very early on, I started by making a graduation plan where I made a spreadsheet and I said, I want to graduate as fast as possible. So if I want to graduate as fast as possible, but by only taking up to 15 credits at a time, I made a spreadsheet to say, okay, these are how many classes I'm going to take each semester. These are the possibilities I have. Let's go ahead and just fill these in and make sure that I get all the prerequisites in beforehand that I need them. So I spent a good hour or two working on my mechanical engineering spreadsheet, and then when I switched to business management, I spent another hour or so working on my business management spreadsheet. So I always knew, I didn't have to think about what classes I was going into each year, and because I knew exactly this class I'm going to do this semester, I'm going to do these few this semester, this next semester, and it was a very easy process for me because I knew at the outset I want to spend as little time in school as possible. I just want to get the degree and get out. That was my mindset going into it. But that still leaves the question open of how did I choose my classes? It just condensed that time frame down of instead of choosing at the beginning of each semester when I had to select classes, instead that was me sitting at the very beginning of my college career and saying, what do I want to do over this time frame? What I ended up doing is I chose classes based on skills, based on things that I thought were interesting, aside from the classes that were, of course, required for my major. But there were two or three main things that I decided to consider when I was choosing different classes. One were the skills that I would hopefully learn from that class. For example, I graduated this past semester. I took a search engine optimization class because I thought that seems like my type of digital marketing that I would really like. I hate marketing as a process overall. I hate the idea of going out and finding people, of trying to advertise to people. That said, I recognize how important it is to learn how to do marketing, to learn how to get your idea in front of people, because it doesn't matter how good your product is if no one ever hears about it. So I thought, what's the ideal way of marketing for me? And after thinking about it for a while, I came to search engine optimization. I don't have to interact with most people. I can focus on good quality content and trying to create things that search engines will say, if people search for these kinds of terms, your article is going to pop up for it, or your product is going to pop up for it, or your book, or your podcast, or whatever it is. This is going to pop up when people search for these kind of terms. That seemed interesting to me. So I took that class, and it was great. I loved that class. It was probably one of the most applicable and one of the best classes I had taken in my college career. because I went into it with the idea of I want to learn the skill because it will be practical for me to learn how to use. And it certainly was. Leaving college, it's one of the types of careers that I'm looking at getting into because it's something that I learned how to do, that I think is interesting. Maybe I don't really enjoy it, but it works well for me because I can do it well. At least I did in my classes, and it was recommended by my professor that I go and look into it a bit more. So that was one way I looked at classes, was the skills that I wanted to get out of it. Second and third is the outcomes slash end goals of that class. There's another class that I took this past semester that maybe didn't go as intended, but I went into it with the idea of I'm going to walk out of this class with a better understanding of a certain thing, with certain outcomes and end goals done. And that class was a product management class, where I thought to myself, okay, I personally want to be an inventor and I want to license products to companies. I could take this class because my ideal outcome for it is that by taking this class, I'm going to understand how different companies are going to look at different products. I'm going to understand how they might look at an inventor, how they might look at the products these inventors present them. So hopefully I could take what I learned there and apply it to my inventing and licensing practice, where I can take my products and craft them to be better suited for other companies, where I can understand their process of how do they solve problems, how do they create products. And by doing that, I can take those outcomes and those end goals, take the things that we work on, take the prototypes we make, and ideally turn that into a process I can use for inventing my own products. That said, once the semester was done, I didn't really have that. I had some interesting products and I had some interesting prototype when all was said and done, but it wasn't really the kind of stuff I wanted to do because it was more software focused. I want to focus more on physical products. That said, there are certainly some things that I can't apply outside of it to my physical products. So in the end, I did find a few outcomes that I can take away and apply to my own things. So yeah, I chose my classes based on, one, what were the major requirements the classes that I had to take for my major in order to graduate. Second, I focused on skills, or the skills that I wanted to learn from a school, that I want to learn from these classes. And third, what were the outcomes and end goals from these classes that I could hopefully apply to other things in life? So that's just a simple way of how I chose my classes and how I chose my skills. Another good example of this is I had one final general class that I had to take. It was, I want to say, spring of 2022. And I thought to myself, what art class do I want to take? Because there was a number of art classes available, and I had to pick one of them for my graduation. I had to pick one of them for my major or whatever to fulfill my final general ed credit. I looked at a lot of them and I said, I could do drawing. I'm good at drawing. I could do watercolor. That seems interesting to me. But then I scrolled down to the bottom and I saw there was an acting class. And I thought, okay, I may not be interested in acting, but it's a skill that'll be very helpful for me when it comes to business, when it comes to presentations, when it comes to podcasting or a bunch of other areas of life, because acting is all about communication. It's all about being able to communicate things well and being able to present yourself in a certain light or in a certain way. So by taking that acting class, I was able to help improve my public speaking abilities. I was able to help improve my presentation skills. Sure, it also maybe helped me improve my lying or deceptivity a little bit, if that's even a word. But that's sort of the frame of reference I took when choosing my classes. Major requirements, skills, outcomes, and goals. So that's how I chose my classes. Next, I want to touch a bit on what were some of the benefits of being a jack of all trades in college. Because, going into it, as I mentioned earlier, college, a lot of it is about shoving you down a speciality. It's about saying, oh, you're majoring in this thing. That's going to be your entire life. That's all you're going to learn. That's all you're going to talk about. And there are some pros to that. There's some cons to that. But by being a jack of all trades in college, I was able to derive a couple extra benefits from it. One, I was quite consistently, in my opinion, the most interesting person in the room. If I can walk into a room and have something interesting to talk about or interesting ideas to connect with, then it made life a bit easier because professors would like me, other classmates would like me, and I could get a little extra help on things, perhaps, because they recognize, oh, you're the guy who does that cool thing, or you're the guy who does something a bit different. And if I'm more memorable to both professors and students, then they're more likely to help me, to recognize me, to perhaps offer a bit more assistance in doing things, as opposed to the person who's just sort of the ghost in the machine, the guy who sits in the backdrop that doesn't really, it doesn't register on most people's radar. Next is that it was a bit easier for me to make connections between classes. As a jack of all trades, you get used to making connections between different skills or between different things that you're learning. And because in college you're often taking a bunch of different classes, a lot of the time you're gonna, like, at least personally, a lot of the time I saw at first a lot of these classes just seem totally detached from each other. Of what's the point of learning this and learning this and learning this? But eventually, I started to get things clicking together. I especially saw this in my mechanical engineering courses, where in one class I'll be talking about one subject, and I'll be talking about that same subject in different contexts across other classes. Or we would be studying a totally new subject in a different class, and I would think back to a class that I took years ago, and I would say, oh, that's why that matters, and I make that connection there. There are even some connections I made between classes that seemed totally unrelated, but it helped me be able to learn and remember things much better for these classes. Next, as something that I already talked about, was by being a jack of all trades, professors were consistently more interested in working with me. A good example of this is that my marketing professor, who eventually became a professor I did research work with, by being a jack of all trades, I was able to present him with some of the projects I've been working on. I showed him my book that I had worked on. I had showed him, I'd been asking him a bunch of different questions, totally unrelated to class, but were just interesting philosophical questions. And by doing that, he became much more interested in me, not just as a student, but as a person and as a partner to work with. So I was invited to join him in working on research stuff, and now eventually, once we get these papers published, I should have my name on at least 3 or 4 different academic papers, more than a lot of professors who are in that university. So yeah, it was an interesting opportunity that came up because I was a jack of all trades, because I developed a number of skills in a number of different areas and presented those skills to different people. In a similar vein to that, I was able to gain a small network of professionals and professors through my professors, where these are people who have been in industry, who know what they're talking about, who aren't just academics, but these are people who actually understand what it's like to be in industry. Sure, it's cool to connect with students, but they may or may not help you down the line. Professors, on the other hand, they already have an established network in the industry. If you want to get a hold of someone who's in that industry, if you have people who have been in industry and people who like you, they're more likely to give you introductions on things. I've been able to get a number of different podcast interviews on this show because of the connections I made in college, such as my recent interview with Marianne Hickman. She was a speaker who came into my professional sales class, and because I had a good relationship with my professional sales teacher, he was able to connect me with her, and I was able to bring her onto the podcast. It's stuff like that, where if you're able to build a network of professionals through your professors, that's going to help you so much more than if you were to just, have a connection with a bunch of different college students. Sure, down the line it might be helpful for you, but immediately I was able to get a lot of benefit from these professional connections I had, all because I was more interesting. Next is that I was able to learn stuff that I didn't know before. As a jack of all trades, you're always trying to learn new things. By being in college, and by being a jack of all trades, I was able to actively make more connections with the things I was learning in school and apply them outside of school to different things that I may be interested in. For example, in physics, I learned about, we talked briefly, there was a one-off comment that my professor made at the time, where glasses are essentially shifting your eyes, they're shifting your vision, and over time, if you continuously wear glasses, your vision is going to get worse and worse and worse. And he explained that to me. He said, okay, that makes sense. That seems interesting. Down the line, I learned a bit more, continued learning a bit more about vision and light and how light works, and eventually I came to the conclusion of, well, wait a second. If your vision can get worse and deteriorate from certain behaviors, certainly your vision can become better through other behaviors. And sure enough, over time, I've slowly been improving and developing my vision to go back from minus 2.5 to minus 2.5 in both eyes to now, my vision fluctuates, where sometimes it's perfect 20/20, sometimes it's like a -1 or minus 1.5. But I was able to connect these ideas I learned in school to other areas. I was able to learn new things I'd never learned before. Of course, that's the benefit of college. College is supposed to teach you things you have never learned before. Finally, in a similar vein to that, is I was exposed to some new ideas and new tools for how to do things. For example, for SEO, I learned about BrightEdge, I learned about Screaming Frog, I learned about a bunch of different software that I thought, oh, that's cool. So this is how you can do basic SEO auditing. Or my statistics classes, I learned about R and RStudio and how to code and how to do statistics using programs. It's these things that perhaps I understood the theoretical side of it before coming to college, but I learned about different tools and how to use them in college. I learned from professionals. I learned from professionals and professors in industry, people who actively use these things. This is how I actually do it, instead of just, this is a cool thing I learned about in an audiobook or in a podcast or in a lesson I learned some time ago. Instead, it was, here's the actual tools you need to do the thing, instead of just, here's an interesting idea, go figure it out for yourself. So those were just some of the benefits that I learned that I got from going to college and being a jack of all trades in college. What about some of the drawbacks of going to college for me? One such drawback was it was difficult to narrow down my options and classes / choose a major. As someone who wants to be a Renaissance man or a generalist, it's difficult to narrow my options to go and be a specialist in something, because I don't want to be a specialist. I want to go out and I want to learn a bunch of different things. But ultimately, I chose business after mechanical engineering because to me it seemed, at the time, it seemed like the most generalist or the most applicable degree I could use across many domains, not just in getting a career, but also in my own entrepreneurial ventures. Next, there's a lot of content that I already learned from free sources, such as books, audiobooks, and podcasts. So going to school, because I'd already studied so many things before taking many of these classes, there were a number of classes that were totally meaningless to me. They were totally a waste of time because I'd already studied a lot of this stuff beforehand. As someone who actively searches out information and is actively always trying to learn something, if you're always doing that, there's a chance that you already know maybe 70 to 80, sometimes 90% of what a professor might teach in a class. For example, in my principles of marketing class, many of the examples that my professor used were examples that I had already heard of before. Many of the ideas that he presented were ideas that I had already heard before. In the end, did I still learn things from that class? Yes, I did. I learned a few things. But a lot of the stuff that we learned in that class, I had already learned elsewhere. So for most of it, it was still interesting, it was a good refresher, but I wasn't learning anything new. And that'll happen a lot if you're actively trying to learn things before classes, or if you're actively learning things outside of classes that just so happen to overlap with things that you might learn in class. So yeah, there's a decent chance that you'll come across information again and again and again just because you're actively trying to learn things on your own. Finally, at least the last drawback I can quickly think of was that there were a number of classes that I deemed worthless to me that I was required to do. For example, I briefly joined the UVU honors program because there were some nice perks to it, but ultimately I decided these perks aren't actually worth it because I'm going to have to spend another year or two here, another semester or two here, just because I wanted to do the honors program, so I ended up dropping it. But as part of being in that honors program, I had to take a couple of philosophy courses. I had to do a couple extra courses that were all about community building and all about going out and meeting new people. And to me, they were just BS classes. They were worthless. I didn't want to spend my time doing them because they weren't going to help me in the long run. For example, some of my philosophy classes, I took a class on Buddhism. And was it interesting? Honestly, not really. But I had to do it because it was one of the requirements to be in the honors program. I did end up doing it, but to me it was worthless. It was a waste of time. I wish I didn't have to do it. And there are a number of other classes like that where I thought, well, this is worthless to me. I wish I didn't do this. I wish I didn't have to do this. Sure, sometimes you're going to be gleefully surprised when you go into a class that you thought, oh, this is going to be pointless, this is going to be worthless to me, and you walk out the other end saying, okay, yeah, that was cool, that was helpful. And it can be hard to determine which of those classes are going to be helpful and which ones are going to be worthless. So it is ultimately still, you're going to have to do it to see, is there any information in this that is actually going to be helpful to me or not? So those are just some of the drawbacks of going to college and being a jack of all trades in it. If you're actively seeking out information, you're probably going to learn things over and over and over again that you've already heard. It can be difficult to narrow down your options to actually to specialize in something / choose a major in something. And then some classes are just going to be kind of worthless to you just because it happens. So outside of benefits and drawbacks, what did I personally do well in college? What things I do what things I personally learned that actually helped out that sort of will help me down the line as well? One thing is that I developed better priority management skills. I was always good at school. I was always good at doing homework on time, at being on time with basically everything. But especially during my time spent in mechanical engineering, I got really good at being able to prioritize things, to be able to organize and manage everything I want to do. A good example of this is that I would regularly, when I was studying mechanical engineering, I would take a number of difficult classes all at once, and I still had to get all the homework done, and somehow magically, even doing upwards of 5 to 6 hours of homework each night, I would still find time to work on projects I wanted to work on. While I was in mechanical engineering, I started silversmithing, I started doing more woodworking, I started making a lot more things, even though theoretically I was supposed to be bogged down by homework 24/7, but that wasn't the case. I could still go grocery shopping, I could still cook my own food, spending like an hour and a half a day cooking my own food. I could work on silversmithing projects, I could work on woodworking projects, I could work on my part-time job, and I still had free time to go and do a bunch of stuff. I was able to develop my priority management skills, and that will help me so much down the line. Because if you can manage your priorities, you're going to be able to get so much more done. Not just the things you have to do, but also the things you want to do. Next, the thing I did really well is I actively cultivated good relationships with my professors. I decided going into it that the most valuable people I could talk to and really develop relationships with in college would probably be my professors, because they've been in industry, they have experience, they have connections. If they like me, they're more likely to write me good referral letters, they're more likely to help me out down the line. And sure enough, that's happened. By actively cultivating good relationships with my professors, I've been able to do so much more. I've been able to get so many more amazing opportunities because of them. Finally, what other thing did I do really well? I continued learning outside of the classroom on my own with personal projects, businesses, and other things. Need I say more? These are great things to do because after school, after I've graduated now, what am I going to do to learn stuff? Well, I'm going to have to teach myself things. Will I learn things on a job? Will I learn things like as I'm working on business stuff? Absolutely. But by being able to start off before I end college, by being able to actively learn things on my own before I ended college, I was able to develop a good habit of figuring out this is how I learn things, this is how I do things, being able to see what works well for me, what doesn't work well for me, and how can I figure these things out. Those are just a couple things that I personally did really well in college. Next, what about my mistakes? Honestly, looking back on it, I don't think I made many mistakes, because the things that I consider mistakes, I think are good decisions I made at the time, and I'm proud of them, and I'd say I'll still do these things. Like if I was back in that situation, I would still do it again. But there are two things that come to mind that, while I personally do not consider them a mistake, I think that other people would probably look at me and say, that was a mistake, you messed up there. And there are two things that I actively did that other people would probably consider mistakes. One was that me personally, I willingly sacrificed my social life so that I could work on projects that mattered more to me. Leaving college, I have maybe 2 or 3 friends here in Utah. After spending 4.5 years here, I have maybe 2 or 3 friends that I'll talk to after college. Do I have a lot of acquaintances? Sure, I have a lot of acquaintances. Will I forget most of them? Absolutely, because I've already forgotten a majority of my high school acquaintances. And in my social life here, I didn't go out to party. I didn't go out and do a bunch of crazy things. I spent most of my time holed up in my room working on projects, studying things, developing things, working on business stuff. And that was a sacrifice I willingly made. I said, well, at the beginning of college, I decided, you know what, social life, not going to be that important to me. I am here to get my degree and to get out because I don't want to stay in Utah. So why should I bother building up social connections here if I'm just going to leave them anyways and probably forget that these people ever existed? That was a decision I actively made. It's one that I personally don't regret, but it's one that maybe will come to bite me down the line. The second thing that other people would probably consider a mistake, and one thing that I will personally probably consider a mistake down the line, is that I actively decided to avoid dating while in college, and this is probably thinking about it, it's probably a bad idea because I want to say it's 75% of married couples met in college. And given that I actively avoided dating and actively said, nope, not doing that, there's a good chance that I just shot myself in the foot, and it's going to be much harder down the line for me to go and find people to date and potentially marry down the line. So, why did I decide to do this? For basically one reason. I did not want to risk the chance of staying in Utah. I do not like Utah. I want to leave Utah as fast as physically possible. At the time of recording this, I have a plane ticket to get out of here, and between graduation and then, I'm just tying up a bunch of loose ends. Sure, there are a couple other reasons of why I chose to avoid dating, partially because I didn't find anyone that I really wanted to date or go out with. But yeah, it's ultimately probably going to be somewhat irritating down the line of me trying to go out and try to actually experience dating down the line because I don't have much dating experience. I don't know what it's going to actually be like, and yeah, I don't know. Just there's a lot of unknowns for me at this point. So yeah, I'll leave it at that. So definitely, I did a couple things really well. Did a couple things that I'll probably come to regret at some point, but right now I'm happy with those decisions. All right, moving on to what majors would I recommend? So, pushing my own stuff aside, what would I recommend to someone going into college now? What, like, for someone who is aspiring to be a jack of all trades, to be a Renaissance man, what would I recommend they do? First and foremost, don't choose a major based on the job title. Choose a major based on the daily actions you want to take, what you want to do every day. If you think, do you want to go to school and become a lawyer? Why? Do you want it because it's a cool job title, or do you want it because you think you will enjoy the act of actually being a lawyer? Do you want to go to medical school and become a doctor because, ooh, that's a really fancy job title? Or do you want to go and become a doctor because you really enjoy cutting people up, you enjoy fixing them together, you enjoy the human body and anatomy and trying to figure things out? Like, it's interesting. A lot of people I see go to college and choose a degree based on the job title of what they're going to do. Based on the job title, not what they're going to do. And they graduate college and they go out into that career and they realize, oh, I hate this. I have the job title I want, but I hate doing this. Whereas if they instead focused on the actual daily actions they're going to be taking with that degree in hand, they're going to probably be much happier compared to someone who just targets a specific job title. Next, on top of that, your major actually doesn't really matter that much. Most people don't actually get a job related to the degree that they get. So just go to school. For people who do decide to go to college and that's right for them, go to school, pick a major. Honestly, it doesn't really matter for most cases. Sure, there are some things that you're going to need a specific degree for, but in most situations, you don't really need it because a degree is mostly just physical proof that you're willing to put up with BS for 2 to 4 years so that you can get a piece of paper that says, I'm good at putting up with BS for 2 to 4 years. Keeping that in mind, you can still choose degrees that have higher chances of being used, or degrees based on skills you want to learn. For generalists, there are a number of degrees that might come in handy. I personally chose a business degree because I want to do more entrepreneurial stuff, and as I'm sort of transitioning between college and entrepreneurial stuff, I want to go and get a job just so I can clear up my student debt a bit faster and then have a bit less risk going into doing more entrepreneurial ventures. I can do a business degree because that can help transition over to various different fields, various different industries I find interesting, and overall it's still kind of fun for me to do. And I still have other things that outside of work that I'm happy doing. But for generalists, you may want to look at a interdisciplinary or I don't remember exactly what it's called, but there are a couple different degrees that some universities offer where you can essentially piece together your own degree. It's something that's cobbled together that has a number of different disciplines or a number of different majors/minors put together in it so that you have your own crafted degree. And no, I'm not saying a double major. There are some actually dedicated degrees for you crafting your own thing that still you finish in the normal amount of time. Which, if I'd known about this a bit sooner before I switch over to business, I may have actually done this. But at the time, I only knew that the business degree exists. I'd heard about this, like this interdisciplinary studies degree at UVU, but I just didn't really understand it. So I ended up doing business anyways, but that's beside the point. If you're a jack of all trades looking at school as an option to go out and learn new things and you have a bunch of different interests and you want to try out a bunch of different things, see if your school has a interdisciplinary degree where you can take a bunch of different classes, where you can take a couple different majors you find interesting and cobble them together into this interesting degree that you have like your own niche understandings of things. If not that, then once again, consider the degrees that have you doing the things you actively want to do day to day. If you want to do business stuff day to day, consider doing business. If you want to crunch numbers every day, consider doing math or accounting. If you want to sit in the lab 24/7 and do study after study after study and be super niche in a very specific topic, consider doing a super niche scientific degree, such as a derivative of biology or derivative of physics, something like that. But really consider what you want to do day to day, not just the job title you're going for. And finally, I guess 2 more ideas from this. What majors would I recommend? What are the chances of you actually getting a good paying job with this degree in hand? Well, I have said that you're probably not going to use your degree to get a job related to that degree. Some cases you will. Some cases you will need a specific kind of degree to get a certain type of job in that field, such as mechanical engineering. If you want to be a mechanical engineer, you probably want a mechanical engineering degree, and yeah. But there are some degrees that are going to be much more helpful, much better than others when it comes to getting a higher paying job. For example, a finance degree is probably going to get you a higher paying job than an education degree. Well, pay is not the be-all, end-all of what you do with your life. It is something you certainly should consider, especially if you're going to school and spending thousands to tens of thousands to sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars to try to get this piece of paper. You should probably consider, what am I going to get paid for to get this piece of paper? If I get this piece of paper, how much money am I going to make by using it? Finally, one thing I think everyone should consider is, do you actually need a degree to do the jobs you want to do? Would it be better if you went to a trade school? Would it be better if you took online classes for a specific thing? Maybe you just get a certification in certain things. Recently, in the news, I heard about a US government job saying, hey, let's strike the computer science degree that you need to get IT jobs in the government, because it turns out, if you actually just have skills and a good portfolio, you're going to do better than the person with the computer science degree if they don't have skills and if they don't have a portfolio. Shocker. Do you actually need a degree to get the job you need? In this day and age, degrees are becoming more worthless, actually, and employers really only care about, can you actually do the job? If you can do the job, guess what? You're probably going to get paid more, you're probably going to do better, you're probably going to get the job because you can actually do it, compared to someone who may have a piece of paper, but they can't actually do the job. So do you really need a degree? There are many other options that you can do instead of going to college and getting a degree. And that brings us to my final main point, my final main question. Would I recommend college? It depends. Personally, I would say don't go to college to quote-unquote discover yourself. In the US, at least, it's a very expensive bill to pay at the end. You can go discover yourself in many other ways before you decide to go to college or not. You can go shadow people at different careers. You can go take a year off to go and travel for a while. You can go to a local public college, like a community college, to get an associate's degree that's pretty cheap and still get a good idea of what you might want to do in life. Then, as I mentioned before, do you really need a degree for a specific career? In most situations, I'd argue no. You can work your way up by gaining experience from many different jobs, or you can go to a trade school, you can go through an apprenticeship, you can try one-off online courses. There are so many options today for higher education / extended education that college isn't the only thing that should be on your list that you can really consider. And college isn't for everyone. Some people are going to thrive so much more in an apprenticeship or in a trade school than they are in college. Some people, it is just better for them to go straight into the workforce after high school. Really, it's going to be up to you, because everyone's different. So, as always, the best answer that you can give of what I recommend someone go to college, the best answer is always going to be, it depends. So what do you think? Do I have some good points, or am I spouting hogwash? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. If you enjoyed this episode, then please share it with a friend you think would like it, or share it on social media. It would absolutely mean the world to me and it helps the podcast grow so much. With all that said, thanks for listening. I greatly appreciate it, and I'll talk to you all later.